focus of today's video. So we need a stamp that you would color in and some type of little bit smaller brush with a good point on it to do some color techniques. You can do some wonderful blending with watercolors. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about experimenting with watercolors versus some other different ways that you can color and the results that I got. I made this little comparison to see if I could really use watercolors for coloring images and be just as satisfied with that as I had been with using ink. I was trying to decide if I was going to keep all of the ink pads that I have. I had a very wide selection of Stampin' Up! Ink pads. Many of them were pretty old, but they still stamped. I re-inked them a couple months earlier and everything was good, but I just wasn't using them. And I have all these Distress Oxide inks, and I really do like those, but eventually they're going to need re-inkers, and it's just going to start to be a lot of stuff. I also had watercolor crayons and some different things, and I wanted to see, how all this stuff stacked up. The watercolor crayons don't take up a huge amount of room, so I figured I would just hang on to those for the time being. So I compared regular watercolors with using Stampin' Up! Inks or Distress inks and a blender pen. And let me show you what a blender pen is. These are blender pens, and this is actually a brand new pack that I've ordered. To use the watercolor crayons, you kind of have to use these, but you can use them for other things. If you take an ink pad, you can take an ink pad and a clear acrylic block and just put some of the ink on the clear acrylic block and then use the blender pen to pick up that ink and add it to your image. The blender pen has liquid in it. I won't say water. I don't know if it's just pure water or there's something more to it, but that will blend with your ink or your watercolor crayon or whatever you have, and it will spread around that color, and you have the same control that you would have with a marker. So I used some older blender pens that I had, and I used Stampin' Up! Ink and I used Distress ink for these. And then I did one with just watercolors. Now these were tube-based watercolors, and I did a sample recently using the watercolors out of this tray. And I ended up with some great colors in both cases. I actually went a little darker with my colors here than I did on that one. But nonetheless, I like the watercolor versions actually better than the ink versions of both of these. Now I've got colored pencils, I've got markers, I've got more things I could try, but just trying to figure out, do I really need all these stamp pads? I didn't feel like I needed them. So that was just the choice that I was making, and I wanted to share that with you because I had done that. I'm not suggesting you throw out all your ink pads. If you're using them, that's great. If you don't already have a lot, you may find that something like watercolors will be sufficient, or one kind of ink pad without having to get carried away and buy so many different ones. Alright, so I'm going to set that aside, and we're going to create this card. I chose to do this one in the video because it's a flower, and if you're a stamper, you no doubt have some kind of flower stamp that you can color in your stamp sets. So you just pick a flower and let's stamp it with some permanent ink. I'm using Ranger Archival ink in jet black for this image. I'm going to be using the mixed media paper for this one, and the reason is to get that really good stamped image. You can get a good stamped image on watercolor crayon or watercolor paper as well, and it looks really pretty, but I know I'll have an even better chance on the smooth paper. This particular stamp, it just doesn't stamp really quite as well in the middle. It has a little bit to do with how I put the label on it. I got it a little curved, it's a little concave, and it just doesn't land quite as good even when it's on the stamping. I can't remember what they call this thing. the Ranger stamp. It's not a stamp image, the stamping pad thing. Anyway, you'll get the idea here in a moment. So we're going to do this image, and I'm going to use mixed media paper, but it works really well, of course, on watercolor paper also. So let's see here where we want it to line up. A little bit higher. I think that'd be good. stamped. I have a couple of smaller watercolor brushes. I have a size 4 and I have a size 2. So round brush, so those should be fine. To get this peachy kind of color, what I did was take some of the red colors and add some of the peach to it, and then blended that in my dish. And of course you could color with any of the colors that you already had. And you can see I've got some that's a little bit darker and a little bit lighter, and I want that effect as we go along. And then the greens, I think I mixed these two greens together to do this one. So I'm going to do some mixing and start to play with coloring this in just by painting. If you are more getting into watercolors, as I'm getting into watercolors, I think this is also going to be good practice for me in controlling my brush and in doing other things. I'm starting with the little bit darker one down here at the base of each of the petals. And I can just use water to draw that up into the main part. And you have to be careful with the mixed media paper that you don't get too much water on here. Or I can add some of this lighter color in here as well. And I find controlling the paint with the brush actually really easy. I haven't had a lot of difficulty in staying in the lines. I say that and I'll probably get outside the lines here in no time, but that's just been my experience. And I am not the best colorer in the world. It's usually something I don't really do a whole lot of. I can't help but buy some of these pretty stamps like this and think I'm going to do a lot of coloring. And as I say, I have all these different coloring medium, but it's not, I don't consider my best thing. But for some reason, I have a little better control, I think, with a paintbrush than I do with a marker, and I just enjoy doing it more. The mixed media paper dries a little faster than the watercolor paper, so that's why I'm kind of completing a petal rather than doing all the dark and then coming back with the light part. I'm doing just a few petals at a time. And I'm not going to show every bit of this coloring on the video because you're getting the idea here of what's going on. I will show, though, in the middle, I'm going to be going back over these dots, these little, there's a scientific name for them, stamen or whatever they are in the middle, but I need some kind of a base, so I'm just going to put that peach all over the center. Now for the leaves, I'm going to pick up some of the greens, a little bit of this more olive green, and then more of the, I guess it's kind of a true green there. Put those together. Olive. And you don't have to do this mixing, you can just pull straight from your palette. And I've been doing all of this with the size 4 brush. I haven't even gotten to my size 2 yet. going to take a little bit of water, slightly wet brush, and just pull this color down towards the end. Now this is a little easier to do on watercolor paper than it is mixed media paper, because again, this dries pretty fast. To do some of these leaves, I think this is where I start to need a little bit smaller brush, because it's a little bit daintier work there. One of the advantages to watercolors is it's fairly easy to clean up your mess. I had a little bit of peach over here, and I used some clear water and picked it up, and I'm going to do the same thing with this green. I'm going to put this there on purpose. It's not that hard for me to get out of the lines, but I wanted to have something to show you that if you just take some clear water and just kind of keep going back over it, you can pick up what you've got on around the edge of something. Kind of got a little carried away adding green there. Most of it. All right, now I need to do these centers, and this is my number 2 brush, and I'm going to pick up some gold paint that I have here in the very back of my tray, and just drop that into each of those little dots and let that dry. This is something I find a little challenging sometimes with markers, is getting this gold in the center to show up. It does really well here. Watercolors will typically dry a little lighter. And you can always go over them and add some more shading and all as you go along. So at this point, okay, I see a little green there I missed. So at this point, once this is dry, then I would trim this down, and I'm going to add my For You, which I'm going to do here in a second, and then just finish the card off with the ribbon. Before I put this together, I stamped one of these on watercolor paper and painted it with the same colors, and you can see some differences in the shade variation and just sort of the way the color takes on watercolor paper versus mixed media. I really like the finished look of the mixed media, but you do have to work a little faster. So it's just worth experimenting if you have both papers to kind of see what you like the best. Alright, now I'm going to finish up this card. I've attached this to a piece of peachy pink cardstock, and I'm going to add some ribbon. This ribbon is really, really old. I have no idea where it came from, but I've had it a very long time, and this is the last of it I'm using for these 2 cards. It's kind of one of my goals, is to work down my ribbon stash a little bit. Oops, I've got it upside down. I have quite a stash of ribbon. And I try to make my cards now flat so that I don't have to worry about extra postage. So I don't really tie bows very often on a card, or if I do, I try to keep it as flat as possible. But a decorative ribbon like this, just sort of wrap it around there. Right. And the other thing you can kind of put around some of your cards too, of course, is washi tape. And if you haven't worked with your washi tape in a while, washi tape goes bad. It starts to get to where you can't unroll it. So that's another thing I'm really trying to use. Ribbon's not going to go bad, but the washi tape is. All right, and then I would just attach this to my card front, and we'll be all finished with our card where we've done some coloring, or in our case, painting, with watercolors to fill in an image. So it's just another way of working with your images, whether they be florals or any other type of image. I did some cards that had a little bird on it. Just a real simple little, like almost stick figure kind of bird, and I got some pretty results with that. So you can do a lot of different things using your watercolors to color in your stamped images. So this is our third video in the series. There are some more videos coming along with more cards to share with you, so be sure and stay tuned for those. And I hope you enjoy the series, and I would love to get any feedback that you have. Thanks for watching.